The man who had never signed a birthday card put his hand on my mother's china cabinet and said, "Before you divide anything, I need my share." I was standing in the dining room of the house where my mother had just been mourned, with my half-brother marking furniture with blue painter's tape and my aunt counting teaspoons into paper sleeves. The funeral flowers were still on the sideboard. The casseroles were still warm in the kitchen. And my biological father, a man I had not seen since I was 7, had walked in like grief came with a guest list. For a second, nobody moved. My stepdad, Ray, had one hand inside the drawer where Mom kept cloth napkins. My brother Eli was crouched beside the cedar chest, tape stuck to his jeans. Eli was my half-brother by blood, but nothing about him had ever felt half. Aunt Linda held 3 silver spoons in her fist like she might throw them. I had the estate notebook under my arm, because that was my job now. I was the daughter who made lists, took calls, signed for flower deliveries, and kept everybody from turning sorrow into a yard sale. The man at the cabinet smiled at me first. "Claire," he said soft, like we had been talking yesterday. "You look just like your mama." My body knew him before my mind wanted to. The narrow face, the dent in his chin, the way he tilted his head, asking for warmth without earning it. He was older now, with gray at his temples, and a tan jacket too clean for a man who claimed he had driven all night. But he still had the same light blue eyes I used to search for in strangers at grocery stores when I was little. Ray shut the napkin drawer slowly. "Martin," he said. He did not raise his voice, which scared me more than if he had. "You need to leave." Martin Bell looked around the dining room as if Ray had missed the point. "I heard Marcy passed. I came to pay respects." "You missed the service," Aunt Linda said. "I found out late." "You found out when the obituary hit Facebook," Eli said, standing up. Eli was 27, taller than all of us, and still young enough to think anger could be clean. "Don't act holy in our house." Martin's smile thinned. "I'm not here to fight with children." That was when I stepped between him and the china cabinet. Not because the cabinet mattered most, but because his hand was still on it. My mother had rubbed lemon oil into that wood every spring. She said some things stayed alive if you touched them with care. Martin's palm looked wrong there, like mud on a white sheet. "You don't get to put your hand on her things," I said. He looked at my arm, then at my face. "Claire, I know this is emotional." "No," I said. "You don't know what this is." The room tightened around those words. Outside, through the front window, I could see cars still parked along the curb. Neighbors had dropped off food and not left yet. In American suburbs, grief has a strange public edge. People bring foil pans and stand in the driveway pretending not to listen. If Martin had wanted privacy, he had picked the worst hour. If he had wanted witnesses, he had picked the best one. Ray came to stand beside me. He had raised me since I was 9. He taught me how to check my oil, how to back into a parking space, how to breathe before answering a person who wanted to pull me into their storm. He had cried exactly once in the past week, in the laundry room, with one of Mom's cardigans pressed to his face. Now he looked at Martin like a locked door. "There's nothing here for you," Ray said. Martin lifted both hands, but he did not back up. "That's where you're wrong. Marcy and I had history. Claire is my daughter. That gives me a place in this conversation." There it was. Not a request. Not an apology. A claim. My aunt made a small sound, half laugh and half disgust. Eli took one step forward, but I put my hand out without looking at him. I did not want this to turn into a hallway shove with neighbors, watching through lace curtains. I also did not want Martin to learn that he could make us scatter just by saying the word daughter. "You have a place in my biology," I said. "That's not the same as a place at this table." Martin's eyes flicked to the dining table. That was where the notebook lay open beside a stack of sticky notes. Mom's handwriting covered the top page in her sharp grocery list script. "Yellow bowl to Linda. Sewing machine to Claire. Ray keeps house until he is ready. Ask Claire about the back room." I had read that last line 10 times since breakfast, and still had not opened the back room. Mom's back room had been her studio, her hiding place, and the one door she kept shut when she needed to be alone. Martin saw the notebook before I could close it. Something changed in his face. It was quick, but I caught it. Hunger is not always loud. Sometimes it is just the eyes arriving before the body. "What back room?" he asked. My grip tightened on the notebook. "You're leaving now." He gave a tired little sigh, as if I was being unreasonable in a way he expected. "I didn't come to steal spoons, Claire. I came because your mother and I had unfinished business. My mother finished raising me without you. Your mother kept things from you. That landed harder than I wanted it to. Not because I trusted him. I didn't. But because dead parents leave locked corners, and living strangers know exactly where to press. Aunt Linda's face changed too. She looked down at the spoons in her hand, then away. It was the smallest movement, but in that room, small movements became sirens. Ray saw me see it. Claire, he said quietly. Not now. Martin heard the warning and stepped into it. See, they know. They've always known more than they told you. My mouth went dry. The active situation was suddenly bigger than a man asking for money in my mother's dining room. He had walked into our first hour of dividing her life and found a loose thread none of us had pulled. I hated him for that. I hated myself more for wanting to know what the thread was. Eli crossed his arms. You have 30 seconds before I call somebody. Martin ignored him. His attention stayed on me, intimate and practiced. I'm not asking for a fight. I'm asking for one conversation. You can give me 10 minutes after 30 years. 25, I said automatically. He blinked. You left when I was 7. I'm 32. If you're going to perform math in my mother's house, do it right. Aunt Linda snorted before she could stop herself. Eli's shoulders dropped an inch. Even Ray's jaw loosened. It was a tiny crack of air in a room that had none. Martin recovered fast. Fair enough. 25 years. I was young. I made mistakes. But Marcy knew why I stayed away. Ray's voice went flat. No. That one word cut through all of us. Ray did not say it like a denial. He said it like a line he would not let Martin cross while Mom was not there to defend herself. For the first time since Martin stepped in, his face lost its easy shape. I turned to Ray. What does that mean? Ray looked at me, and I saw the weak on him, the unshaved gray on his jaw, the red at the edges of his eyes. The man had spent 3 nights sleeping in the recliner because the bed was too full of my mother's absence. He should not have had to answer questions planted by the person who had abandoned me. But he did answer, because Ray had never used silence as a weapon. It means your mother did not keep him away. He left. That is the truth I know. Martin laughed once. The truth you know. The front door creaked behind him, and Mrs. Alvarez from next door appeared in the entryway, holding an empty casserole dish against her chest. She froze when she saw Martin. Her eyes went from his face to mine, then to Ray. She had lived next door since before I was born. She knew every car that had ever pulled into our driveway, and every Christmas light Ray had ever cursed at in December. Claire, she said carefully, do you want me to stay? That question almost undid me. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was ordinary. A neighbor with a dish, asking if I wanted her body in the room as a shield. Martin noticed it too. His shoulders tightened. Public shame was not the story I wanted, but community presence was different. It was not a stage. It was a wall. Yes, I said. Please. Mrs. Alvarez stepped fully inside and set the dish on the hall table. She did not ask who Martin was. She knew enough to stand near me. Martin looked irritated now. This is family business. No, I said. Family business was sitting with Mom when the morphine made her scared. Family business was Ray learning how to braid my hair because I cried before picture day. Family business was Eli driving home from college every weekend, when Mom started chemo again. You don't get to use that word like a key. The room went quiet, but this time the quiet belonged to me. I felt it move through my chest, hot and clean. I had spent my childhood making excuses for Martin, because kids will do almost anything to make abandonment less personal. He was busy, he was far away. He didn't know how to find me. Then I grew up, and learned phones worked both ways. Martin lowered his voice. I deserve to see what she left. The lawyer already told you there is no claim here, Ray said. No bloodline gives you the right to inventory a dead woman's house. No, Eli said. Aunt Linda said nothing, but she put the spoons down and stood beside the dining table, blocking the notebook with her hip. Martin's gaze moved over each of us. He was measuring the room now, looking for the softest seam. He found me again. Claire, there is something of mine in this house. That sentence changed the air. Not because I believed him, but because he said it with no performance at all. For the first time, he sounded less like a man bluffing for money, and more like a man who had come for one specific thing. What? I asked. Ray turned toward me. Claire. I kept my eyes on Martin. What thing? Martin looked past me toward the hallway that led to Mom's studio. The closed door sat at the end, painted the same pale green it had been my whole life. A strip of afternoon sun crossed the floor in front of it, stopping short of the threshold. He said, "Your mother knew." Aunt Linda's hand flew to her throat. Ray took one step, not toward Martin, but toward that hallway. Mrs. Alvarez whispered my name, like she was trying to pull me back from traffic. I should have told Martin to get out again. I should have called the police, or at least closed the notebook, or done any sensible thing a grown woman does when a stranger with familiar eyes tries to turn grief into leverage. Instead, I looked at the green door and remembered my mother's last awake hour, when she squeezed my fingers and said, "Don't let anybody rush you in that room." Martin had not heard her say that. Nobody in this dining room had, except me. I looked back at him, and for the first time since he walked in, I did not feel like the child he left behind. I felt like the person standing between him and whatever my mother had protected. "You can wait on the porch," I said, "or you can leave. But you are not coming into that room." Martin did not go to the porch until Eli took one step toward the front hall, and Ray said, very quietly, "You can leave with your dignity or without it." Martin looked at Ray as if he had been waiting 25 years for that sentence, then smiled like he had tasted something bitter and liked it. "Still playing husband," he said. "Still standing in a house that had my name in it before yours ever did." Nobody moved for a second. That was the first time Martin had aimed straight at Ray instead of at me, and I saw it land. Ray's face did not change much, but his hand tightened around the blue painter's tape until the cardboard ring bent. Aunt Linda made a small sound near the silver spoons. Mrs. Alvarez set her casserole dish down on the entry table with both hands, slow and deliberate, like she was placing a brick in a doorway. I said, "Porch, Martin. Now." My voice came out steadier than I felt. He turned toward me, and for a blink I saw the younger man from one old photo Mom had kept in a shoebox, dark hair, restless eyes, a smile that looked charming until you noticed it never reached the rest of him. Then the picture broke. He was just a man in a funeral suit, standing too close to my mother's things. "You open that room without me," he said, "and you'll wish you hadn't." He walked out, but he did not leave. Through the sheer curtain, I could see him lower himself onto the porch bench like a customer waiting for service. The house changed after the front door shut. It did not get peaceful. It got thin, like every wall had started listening. Eli locked the door and stood with his back to it. Ray stared toward the green backroom door. Aunt Linda went back to the spoons, but she counted the same one 3 times. Mrs. Alvarez crossed herself once, very fast, and then pretended she had only brushed crumbs off her blouse. I picked up Mom's estate notebook from the dining table. My thumb found the line again without trying. "Ask Claire about the back room." My own name looked strange in Mom's handwriting, as if she had written it for someone else to read after I was too stunned to answer. "What does he think is in there?" I asked. I did not look at one person in particular. That made it harder for anyone to hide. Ray said, "He thinks everything is his if he wants it badly enough." That was true, but it was not an answer. I waited. Ray rubbed one hand down his face, and grief made him look older than he had looked at the cemetery. "Claire, your mother didn't want today to turn into this." "Today already turned into this," I said. "So tell me what I'm standing in front of." Aunt Linda stopped touching the spoons. She looked at Ray, and he shook his head once, not hard, just tired. That tiny shake told me there had been a whole conversation before I entered it. It hurt more than Martin's threat. Martin was a stranger with my eyes. Ray and Linda were my people. If they had been guarding a closed door in my own mother's house, then I had been trusted and kept outside at the same time. Linda said, "Your mother made me promise not to open that room for him." Her voice had lost its usual sharpness. "Not for money, not for guilt, not if he showed up crying, not if he showed up angry. She said if the day came, you would know when." I almost laughed, because I did not know anything. I knew Mom had smelled like hospital soap when she grabbed my wrist. I knew she had used the last of her strength to tell me not to be rushed. I knew a dead woman had somehow expected more from me than the living ones were willing to explain. Eli pushed away from the door. "Then we don't open it." "We do," I said. He stared at me. "Claire." "We do," I repeated, softer. "But not because he told us to." That was the only difference I had, and I held on to it. If I let Martin set the pace, the room belonged to him before we even touched the knob. If I waited until I was fearless, the room would stay closed forever. Mrs. Alvarez stepped into the hallway with me. "I'll stand here," she said. "He can see me through the glass if he tries anything." It was such a neighbor thing to say, so practical and brave in the same breath, that my throat tightened. She had known me since I wore plastic barrettes and carried sidewalk chalk in both pockets. Now she stood between my biological father and my mother's last private place, holding nothing but a dish towel and her own stubborn body. Ray handed me the key from the little hook by the basement door. It had a red rubber cap on it, the kind Mom used because her fingers got stiff after chemo. I remembered her turning that key with 2 hands in the last months, pretending it did not hurt. I remembered her telling me she was just sorting fabric, just making sense of things, just keeping busy. I had believed her because believing her was easier than asking why she locked the room behind herself. The key went in badly. My hand shook once, and the metal scraped before it caught. On the porch, a floorboard creaked. Martin had stood up. I did not turn around. I turned the key, opened the green door, and stepped into my mother's back room. For a second, nothing made sense because it was too ordinary. The room smelled like cedar, steam, and the lavender sachets Mom used in drawers. Her sewing machine sat by the window with a square of blue fabric still under the needle. A mug of old pencils stood beside it. Sunlight cut across the work table and lit up little threads in the air. The room was not a vault. It was not a hiding place full of cash or jewelry or old scandal. It was where my mother had gone to be alone, while the rest of us thought she was resting. Then I saw how carefully she had arranged it. Along one wall were brown paper bundles tied with cotton string, each one labeled in thick marker with a first name. Ray, Linda, Eli, Mrs. Alvarez. Mine was not there. That missing bundle pulled at me harder than all the labeled ones. On the far wall, a white sheet covered something tall and narrow. The sheet had been pinned at the corners, not thrown over in a hurry. Mom had meant it to wait. Eli came in behind me and stopped talking for the first time all day. Ray stayed at the threshold, one hand on the doorframe. Aunt Linda walked straight to the sewing machine and touched the back of the chair, as if she expected Mom's warmth to still be there. "She was in here the Tuesday before the ambulance," Linda said. "She told me to stop fussing and bring her more thread." Linda tried to smile, but it broke. Bossy to the end. A knock hit the front window, not the door, the window. We all froze. Martin stood outside the living room glass, one hand raised, looking past Mrs. Alvarez and down the hallway. He could not see into the back room from there, but he knew we were inside. He tapped again, 2 fingers against the pane, patient and ugly. Ray stepped out of the room so fast the floor creaked. "Stay here," he said. I did not stay because he told me to. I stayed because the room had become louder than Martin. My eyes moved over the bundles, the machine, the pinned sheet, and the little things Mom had left exactly where her hands had last needed them. A tomato-shaped pincushion. A tape measure curled like a sleeping snake. And one white sheet waiting like it had been holding its breath. Martin hit the front window with his knuckles again, harder this time, and the sound cracked through my mother's back room like he had already gotten inside. I turned with the red-capped key still in my hand, and for 1 second I felt 7 years old again, frozen in a hallway while grown-ups decided whether I was allowed to breathe. Ray moved first. He stepped out of the room and shut the green door behind him, not locked, just closed enough to put his body between Martin and whatever my mother had left for us. "Stay in here," Ray said through the door. His voice was calm, but not soft. "Claire, you do what your mother asked." Eli started after him, and Aunt Linda grabbed his sleeve. "No," she said. "If you go out there angry, he wins something for free." That stopped Eli better than any lecture would have. He stood there with his jaw tight, staring at the closed door like Martin might melt through it. Mrs. Alvarez crossed herself once, then went to the back window and pulled the thin curtain across the glass. It was such a small motion, but it changed the room. Martin could bang and shout from the front of the house, but in here my mother's air stayed ours. I looked at the brown paper bundles on the table because they were the safest thing to look at. They were tied with cotton string, each one labeled in my mother's square, careful handwriting. Ray, Linda, Ailey, Mrs. Alvarez. No Claire. I stared at the blank spaces between them, waiting for my name to appear like my grief had made me blind, but there was nothing. Aunt Linda saw my face. "Honey," she said, and that one word almost undid me. "I'm fine," I said, which was a lie so thin nobody honored it by believing me. Outside, Ray's voice came from the front porch. low and steady. I couldn't catch every word, but I heard Martin's answer. That room has my property in it. Then a thud. Maybe his palm on the door. You people don't get to steal from me because she died, Eli whispered. I swear to God. Mrs. Alvarez turned from the curtain. You swear to your mother instead, she said. Keep your hands clean. That was the first time all day anyone had said the right thing to him. Eli shut his mouth and looked down. His anger did not leave, but it had somewhere to stand now. I picked up Ray's bundle first because I needed my hands to move. The string came loose with one tug. Inside was not money, not jewelry, not anything Martin would have understood as a share. It was Ray's old flannel shirt, the blue one he wore every Saturday when I was a kid, cut into neat squares and stitched into a lap blanket. Folded inside it was my mother's chipped yellow coffee mug from the porch. Ray's name was written on a small cloth tag sewn near the edge, but there was no note explaining why. There didn't need to be. Ray had brought her coffee in that mug every morning during chemo, until she couldn't drink it anymore. Aunt Linda pressed her fingers over her mouth. Oh, Marcy. I wrapped the blanket back up, not because it was fragile, but because Ray deserved to open it when Martin was not pounding on the house. Linda's bundle held a box of sewing scissors with worn black handles and a stack of quilt squares made from dresses I remembered from family cookouts. Eli's held his Little League jersey, the one Mom swore she had lost in a move, folded under a new denim jacket with the sleeves unfinished. Mrs. Alvarez's bundle held an embroidered table runner with tiny red birds along the edge and a packet of the flower seeds my mother had saved every fall. Each bundle was a life, not a price. That made Martin's voice at the front door sound uglier. He was asking for a share in a language my mother had refused to speak, but my name still was not there. I moved to the tall shape under the white sheet. It stood against the far wall between two shelves of thread, narrow and straight, with the sheet pinned tight at the top, like my mother had dressed it for a funeral. My fingers found the first pin. It was one of her pearl-headed pins, the kind she used to hold satin in place. My hand shook, so I stopped and took a breath. Aunt Linda came close but did not touch me. She wanted you to do that part. I know, I said. The second pin came out, then the third. The sheet loosened and slid down in a soft rush, pooling at my feet. Under it was a full-length mirror. For a moment I was almost angry, not because it was nothing, but because it was too much. The mirror was the old one from our upstairs hallway, the one my mother had taken down the summer before I left for college. I had thought she donated it. Instead, she had framed it in strips of fabric, all stitched by hand. There was Ray's blue flannel along one side, Aunt Linda's green holiday apron, a scrap of Eli's baby blanket, a piece of Mrs. Alvarez's rose-print kitchen curtain. Other fabrics I knew by feeling before I knew by memory. Across the top, my mother had embroidered 5 words in dark blue thread. Claire, look at who stayed. I did not cry right away. The words were too direct for tears. They hit like a hand on my shoulder, firm enough to keep me standing. My mother had not forgotten me. She had made me stand in front of my own life, and see it without Martin's shadow in the middle. Eli came up beside me. His anger fell off his face. That's yours, he said. No, Aunt Linda said quietly. That's her answer. I looked closer at the frame. Near the bottom, where the fabric strips met, there was one narrow gray piece sewn apart from the others. It was not blended into the pattern. It hung loose at the end, unfinished, with a raw edge. Beside it, in my mother's stitching, were 2 initials. M.B. The room seemed to tighten around those letters. Martin Bell had a place on the mirror, but it was not inside the frame. He was a loose strip, attached enough to name, not enough to hold anything up. Mrs. Alvarez made a small sound. She told the truth with a needle. From the front of the house, Ray said something sharper than before. Then Martin shouted, "Ask her what's in the gray pocket." All of us went still. He had not seen the mirror. The curtains were closed, and the back room window faced the side yard, not the porch. But he knew about a gray pocket. My eyes dropped from the loose gray strip to the bottom of the mirror, where the fabric folded over itself. There, almost hidden under the raw edge, was a small pocket stitched flat against the wood. Aunt Linda whispered, "Don't open that just because he said to." That was exactly what my mother's warning had been about. Not the room, not the mirror. The moment someone else's hunger tried to rush my hand. Martin hit the porch door so hard the glass rattled in its frame, and for 1 second every person in the back room looked at the gray pocket instead of at him. I still had my hand near the mirror, close enough to feel the loose strip marked with his initials brush my knuckle. It was only fabric, just a dull piece of gray cotton sewn at Droma Mabris, but Martin had named it like it was a safe. That was what scared me, not that he was angry. I had known angry men before. It was that he had known where to point. Claire, Ray said very low, step away from it. I did not step away. I looked at the pocket, then at the bundles my mother had tied for everyone who had shown up for her life in ordinary ways. Ray's flannel, Linda's scissors, Eli's jacket, Mrs. Alvarez's seeds. My mother had made a room out of people, and Martin was outside pounding like he could still make himself the center of it. I said, if Mom wanted me to ask about this room, then I'm not letting him be the one who tells me what I'm allowed to see. Aunt Linda's face changed before she spoke. That was how I knew she had been afraid of this exact moment. She reached for the sewing scissors from her bundle, then stopped herself, like touching them without permission would be wrong. Marcy said if he ever asked for that pocket, you were supposed to open it with your own hands. Not his, not mine, yours. That sentence did something worse than Martin's shouting. It made the room quiet. Eli, who had been breathing like he wanted to tear the door off its hinges, turned toward Linda. You knew there was something in there? Linda did not defend herself. She just nodded once. I knew there was a pocket. I didn't know what she put inside. From the porch, Martin shouted. Linda, don't start acting holy. You know what she took. Mrs. Alvarez moved closer to the door without a word. She was small, but she had that church basement kind of strength, the kind that came from carrying hot pans, sick babies, and bad news without asking anyone to move first. She put her palm flat against the doorframe and said through the glass, You stay outside. Martin laughed, but it had lost its easy cruelty. Or what? Or you will have to explain why 5 people watched you try to force your way into a dead woman's sewing room. That held him for half a breath. It was not proof. It was not a threat dressed up in rules. It was a neighbor standing between him and my mother's last work. And somehow that carried more force than anything official could have in that moment. I took the scissors from Linda. The black handles were warm from her hand. My fingers shook so badly, the blades tapped together. A tiny metal sound that made my stomach turn. I wanted my mother there. I wanted her to say, No, baby. Not that one, the other seam. I wanted her to be annoyed at all of us for crowding her room. Instead, I had her mirror, and one gray strip that my father had turned into a command. The pocket was not obvious until I lifted the strip. My mother had sewn it flat against the back of the mirror frame, tucked under the fabric so cleanly that you could have stared at it for years and never known it opened. The stitches were small and even. Chemo had bent her hands by the end, but these stitches were steady. She had made this before her hands got bad, or she had fought for steadiness because this mattered. Don't cut the fabric, Ray said. I know, I said, though I did not know. I only knew I could not bear to damage what she had made. I slid one blade under a single thread. The thread popped. Martin hit the door again, but softer this time, like he had heard the sound and hated that he was not close enough to control it. Eli swore under his breath. Linda put a hand on his arm, and he let her. That was new. Eli did not calm down because he was less angry. He calmed down because my mother's room had made anger feel too clumsy. The pocket opened with a dry little sigh. Inside was a faded blue velvet pouch, no bigger than my palm. Not a deed, not cash, not a document that could explain 25 years in one clean paragraph. It was smaller than that, heavier than that. The kind of thing a person hides because paper can be denied, but objects remember hands. I turned the pouch over once. Something inside knocked softly against the fabric. Martin stopped shouting outside. That sudden silence made every hair on my arms lift. He had heard something change. Or he had felt it. I do not know how men like Martin know when the room has found the one thing they fear, but he knew. Ray took one step closer. Eli stopped breathing loudly. Aunt Linda whispered, Claire, open it. Mrs. Alvarez lowered her phone from her ear, not ending the call, just listening. I held the pouch in front of the mirror my mother had made for me, and for one strange second I saw all of us behind my own reflection. The people who stayed. The people who were still standing. Then I loosened the drawstring. The pouch did not hold money, and that almost made Martin's silence worse, because what slid into my palm was smaller, heavier, and far more personal than cash. A man's gold signet ring landed against my skin first, cold as a coin. Tied through it with faded green thread was a hospital bracelet so tiny it looked impossible that any wrist of mine had ever fit inside it. The plastic beads spelled my first name. Claire. Not Belle. Not his. Just Claire. For one breath, nobody in that sewing room moved. Even Martin went quiet on the other side of the front door, as if he had felt the ring leave the pouch from 20 feet away. I stood in front of my mother's mirror with that ugly gray strip hanging open, and I understood the shape of the trap she had left behind. It was not a trap for me. It was a trap for him. Aunt Linda made a sound like the air had been pushed out of her. "Oh, Marcy," she whispered. Ray looked at the little bracelet, then at the ring, and his face changed in a way I had only seen once before, when a doctor had called him into a hallway and made him sit down before speaking. Eli leaned closer, all his anger suddenly focused into silence. "Mrs. Alvarez kept one hand on the doorknob, but her eyes were on my palm. Outside, Martin struck the door again. "I know you found it," he shouted. "That ring belongs to my family." I closed my fingers over both pieces. The thread pressed into my skin. "He knows about the ring," I said. Aunt Linda nodded, but she looked sick. "He wore it the day you were born," she said. "I only saw it once. He was standing outside the nursery window, twisting it around and around. Marcy wouldn't let him come in until he could speak to her without threatening to leave. He took it off and put it in her hand like it proved something. I never knew she kept it." Martin heard enough to start yelling again. "That is not hers. That is not yours. Tell Claire to bring it here." My name in his mouth made my whole body tighten. He had avoided saying it all afternoon unless he needed something from me. Now he could say it because the thing he wanted was touching my baby bracelet. My mother had tied his family pride to the smallest proof that I had existed, and she had left him no clean way to take one without touching the other. Ray stepped closer to me, not blocking me this time, just near enough that I could feel he would move if I asked. "You don't have to answer him," he said. "I know," I said, but my voice did not sound like I knew. It sounded like I was still 8 years old, waiting at the window because my mother had brushed my hair twice and said maybe today. That old part of me wanted one ridiculous thing. I wanted Martin to ask for me first, just once, even by accident. I walked toward the front of the house before I could talk myself out of it. Eli said my name, but Aunt Linda touched his sleeve. "Mrs. Alvarez opened the inner door just enough for me to stand behind the locked screen. Martin was on the porch, red in the face, his gray jacket damp under the arms. He looked past my eyes and straight at my fist. "Open your hand," he said. I did. The ring hung from the green thread. My hospital bracelet dangled beneath it, the beads knocking softly against the gold. Martin reached for the screen so fast Ray's hand came up behind me. The screen rattled under Martin's fingers. "Give me that." I kept my palm flat. "Say what it is." "It's my ring." "And this?" I lifted the bracelet a little. His mouth tightened. He looked toward the driveway, toward the quiet street, toward anywhere that was not the tiny bracelet with my name on it. "That's something your mother tied to it." Mrs. Alvarez's voice cut in from beside me. "No, that is her baby bracelet." Martin glared at her. "This is family business," Ray answered before I could. "Then speak like family." That line landed harder than any shove would have. Martin's eyes moved to Ray, and for a second the porch felt too small for both of them. Ray did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He had packed my lunches, fixed my bike, sat through my school concerts, and slept in a plastic chair beside my hospital bed when I had pneumonia. Martin had a ring and a last name. Ray had years. Martin pointed at my hand. Her mother had no right to hide Belle property in that room. I almost laughed, but it came out thin and broken. "You came here today for a ring." "I came here to make sure I wasn't—" Martin stopped himself so hard his jaw clicked. The almost words sat between us like a lit match. Robbed, cheated, exposed. Whatever he had been about to say, it was not daughter. It was not sorry. It was not Claire. He looked from the ring to my face and seemed angry that I was still attached to the thing he wanted. "Make sure you weren't what?" I asked. He did not answer. That was when I understood that my mother had not hidden a treasure. She had preserved a choice he had spent 25 years pretending he never made. For 1 second, the whole porch went quiet around the thing Martin had almost admitted. I still had the ring and my baby bracelet in my hand. The green thread cut a soft line across my palm. Martin stood outside the locked screen door with his face too close to the mesh, breathing like he had run all the way from another life. Ray was beside me, not touching me, but near enough that I could feel him waiting. Behind me, Linda had one hand on the sewing table, and Mrs. Alvarez had not moved from the doorframe. "Make sure you weren't what?" I asked again. Martin looked past me at the room, at the little bundles my mother had made for the people who stayed. His eyes flicked over Ray's flannel, Linda's scissors, Eli's jacket, the paper packet of seeds. He saw proof of care everywhere, and none of it belonged to him. That seemed to make him angrier than the locked door. "Cheated," he said at last. "I came here to make sure I wasn't cheated by Marcy one last time." Ray's face changed. Not loud, not dramatic, just a small hardening around his mouth, like someone had put a hand on an old bruise. "Careful," he said. Martin laughed once. "Of course. Saint Ray gets to stand in my house and tell me to be careful." "It was never your house," Linda said. Martin snapped his eyes toward her. "And that was Marcy's trick, wasn't it? She made everyone believe whatever she needed them to believe. Poor Marcy. Brave Marcy. Meanwhile, she had Belle property hidden behind a mirror like a thief." The word thief hit the sewing room wrong. Eli took a step forward before Linda caught his sleeve again. I should have been scared of Martin then, but what I felt was stranger. I felt the last small part of me that still wanted him to sound like a father start to loosen its grip. He was standing 10 feet from me, looking at the bracelet from the day I was born, and all he could see was gold. "Why now?" I asked him. "You stayed gone for years. Why did that ring matter today?" Martin wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. For the first time, he looked tired instead of only furious. "My father died," he said, 3 weeks ago. We're dividing what's left tonight." There it was. Not grief. Not regret. A table somewhere with his family around it. Land, accounts, furniture, whatever the Bells had guarded from each other for decades. Martin had not come back because my mother died. He had come because his own father did. And because something in this room could cost him standing at that table. Linda whispered. "That's why." Martin heard her. "Don't pretend you understand my family." "I understand timing," Linda said. He pointed through the screen at my hand. "That ring belongs with my father's estate. My brothers have been waiting 25 years to say I lost it because of Marcy. If they see it tied to that—" He stopped before he said bracelet, like the word would burn his tongue. "If they see it like that, they'll use it." "Use it how?" I asked. He stared at me, and for the first time he answered too fast. "They'll say I gave it away," Ray said. "Did you?" Martin's throat moved. Outside, somewhere down the road, a dog barked twice and stopped. The whole house seemed to lean toward his answer. He could have lied cleanly. He had lied before. But the ring was in my hand, the bracelet was tied to it, and Aunt Linda had already said she remembered him wearing it the day I was born. "I left it at the hospital," Martin said. "That is not the same thing." I felt the ring get heavier. "With me." "With your mother," he said. "With me," I said again, because my name was right there on the bracelet. His face tightened. "You were a baby." That sentence did what all his shouting had not done. It showed me the narrow little door he had used to leave. I had been too small to count. Too small to accuse him. Too small to remember. So he had decided nothing he did to me could ever be held against him. Mrs. Alvarez spoke from behind me. "Babies are people, Martin." He looked at her with pure contempt. "This is exactly why I didn't come back inside. Everybody in here thinks they get a vote." "No," Ray said. "Everybody in here knows who she is." Martin slammed his palm against the screen. The frame rattled, and Ray stepped in front of me before I could breathe. Eli moved at the same time. The porch boards groaned under Martin's boots as he grabbed the handle and yanked. Once, twice, hard enough that the latch screamed. "Open the door," Martin said. "Give me the ring, Claire." He used my name then, not daughter, not family. Just my name, because he needed something from me, and knew the shape of the key. For one stupid second, it still reached me. That was the cruel part. A father can starve a place in you for years, and one crumb can still make that place ache. I stepped around Ray before he could stop me. I did not open the screen. I only came close enough that Martin had to look at my face instead of my hand. "Say what the bracelet is." His eyes dropped to the green thread. "It's old hospital trash. Say whose it is." Yours, he said. And what does that make you? He looked at Ray, then at Linda. Then at the hallway behind me, as if there might be an escape hidden in the wallpaper. It makes me the man your mother tried to trap. Ray's voice was low. No. It makes you the man who keeps proving why she had to. Martin's hand shot back from the screen like Ray had struck him. Then headlights swept across the front window, bright and sudden. Everyone turned. A car pulled in behind Martin's truck, close enough to block him. Its engine stayed running for a moment, then cut off. A door opened. Heavy footsteps came up the walk, slower than Martin's had been. The man who stepped into the porch light looked enough like Martin to make my stomach drop, but his face had a different kind of wear in it. He was broader, grayer, with a work jacket zipped wrong, and one hand braced against the railing like his knee bothered him. But his eyes were clear and fixed on Martin. The man from the car looked at Martin's fist on our screen door and said, "Let go before I say out loud what you came here to hide." Martin froze with the wire mesh still bent under his knuckles. The stranger stood in the driveway with his car blocking Martin's truck, broad in the shoulders, gray at the temples, and familiar in a way that made my stomach tighten before he even said his name. He had Martin's mouth, but not Martin's restless eyes. "Who are you?" Ray asked from beside me, his arms still half in front of my body. The man did not look away from Martin. "Owen Bell," he said. "His older brother." Then he looked at the ring and baby bracelet in my hand, and his face changed. Not with surprise exactly. More like something he had refused to believe had finally walked into the room and stood under good light. Martin dropped his hand from the door. "You followed me? You left our father's house in the middle of dividing his things," Owen said. "You said you had to pick up what belonged to you. I had a feeling that meant trouble for somebody smaller than you." Martin laughed once, ugly and short. "You don't know what this is. I know you're standing on a dead woman's porch trying to rip open a door," Owen said. "That's enough to start." Behind him, Mrs. Alvarez had one hand on her phone, and the other pressed flat to her chest. Aunt Linda held Eli by the sleeve, but Eli wasn't pulling forward anymore. Everybody had gone still, because the shape of the danger had changed. Martin had come here thinking we were Marcy's leftovers. Now someone from the family table he cared about was watching him breathe hard through his nose on our steps. Owen came closer, but he stopped at the bottom stair. He did not ask me to open the door. That mattered to me before I understood why. He looked through the screen at me and said, "Are you Claire?" My fingers tightened around the green thread. "Yes." He swallowed. "I heard your name once. Years ago." "Not from him," Martin snapped. "Don't." Owen turned his head just enough. "You don't get to don't me today." That one sentence did what all of Martin's shouting had not done. It made him look smaller. Not harmless, not sorry, but smaller. His shoulders were still squared, and his boots were still planted on Marcy's porch, yet he no longer owned the air around him. Owen looked back at me. "May I see it from there?" I lifted my hand again. The signet ring hung heavy against the tiny bracelet. The beads spelling my name knocked softly against the gold. Owen did not reach for it. He only stared. His jaw worked once, and then he said, "That is his ring." Martin seized on that. "Exactly." Owen held up one hand without looking at him. "And that bracelet was tied to it by someone who knew you would come back for gold before you came back for a child." Nobody spoke. Even the cicadas outside seemed to thin out for a second. I felt the sentence move through the hallway, past Ray, past Aunt Linda, past every bundle Marcy had left behind in that room. It did not prove anything new. It named what had been sitting in my palm all along. Martin stepped down one stair toward Owen. "You think you can come here and judge me? You don't know what Marcy did. She made everything impossible." "She had a baby," Owen said. "She used that baby. She named that baby," Owen said, and his voice went hard. "And you left." Martin's eyes flashed to me. For one breath, I thought he would finally say the word daughter, even if he threw it like a stone. Instead he said, "Give me the ring, Claire. Don't let them turn this into something it isn't." There it was, my name in his mouth, careful now, not shouted, not spat, polished. He had learned the shape of it when it became useful. Ray shifted beside me, but he did not answer for me. Aunt Linda didn't either. Owen waited at the foot of the stairs. They all left the next move in my hands, and that scared me more than being cornered had. Because being cornered told me what to do. Being trusted made me choose. I looked at Martin through the torn screen. "If I give you this ring, what am I to you?" His face closed. Don't make a scene. We're already in one, I said. My voice shook, but it stayed loud enough. Answer me. Martin looked at Owen, then at Ray, then back at me. He understood the trap. If he didn't, the ring stayed tied to the baby he wanted erased. Owen said quietly, "Say it, Marty." Martin's mouth tightened at the childhood name. She's Marcy's daughter. The porch seemed to tilt under those words. They should not have hurt. I knew the truth before he said them, but hearing him choose the empty place out loud still hit like a slap. Ray's hand found my shoulder. Not gripping. Just there. I nodded once. Then you don't ask me like family. Martin's eyes sharpened. Claire. No, I said. You used it once. That's all you get. I turned away from the screen door and walked into the sewing room. Nobody followed me. The mirror was still off the wall, leaning against the chair, showing a crooked slice of the hallway behind me. Marcy's little pouch lay open on the table. I set the ring and bracelet down beside it and picked up her sewing scissors. My hands were clumsy, but the blades were sharp. For a second, I could not cut the green thread. It felt wrong to undo the one knot Marcy had trusted to outlast her. Then I understood that I was not undoing her. I was finishing what she had started. She had tied Martin's pride to my name so he could never touch one without feeling the other. I could decide what stayed tied to me now. I cut the thread. The sound was tiny. Almost nothing. But in that quiet house, it landed. I carried the ring back to the door in one hand and my baby bracelet in the other. Martin's eyes went straight to the gold. Owen's went to my face. I spoke to Owen, not Martin. If this belongs at your father's table, take it there. But it doesn't go through him. Martin lunged one step up. Ray moved faster than I had ever seen him move, putting his body against the door. Eli broke free from Linda and came to Ray's side. Mrs. Alvarez said, "I'm calling now." And this time, nobody told her not to. Owen climbed the stairs slowly, keeping his hands open where I could see them. Martin stood between him and the railing, breathing hard. "Move," Owen said. "You always wanted me out," Martin said. "No," Owen said. "I wanted you to stop making everybody else pay for being near you." Martin swung his arm as if to block him, but Owen did not flinch. He stepped into Martin's space with the tired certainty of someone who had known him all his life. "You touch this door again," Owen said, "and you don't come back to our father's house tonight. Not for the ring, not for a chair, not for one spoon with the Bell name on it." That was the sentence that broke him. Not because Owen had threatened money. Because Owen had threatened the room Martin had been racing toward when he came for us. The family table. The men who would weigh him. The last place where he could still pretend he had only misplaced a piece of gold. Martin looked at me one more time. There was hatred there, but also panic. He had come to collect a ring and leave a baby behind again. Now the baby had a voice, a locked door, and a witness from his own blood standing on the steps. I opened the inner door only as far as the chain allowed. Ray stayed beside me. Through the gap, I placed the ring in Owen's palm. I did not let him touch the bracelet. Owen closed his hand around the gold and bowed his head once, like he knew better than to say thank you for something that had cost too much. Martin said, "You'll regret that." For the first time all day, I believed he was wrong. "I already know what regret sounds like," I said. "It sounds like you asking for a ring before asking if I was alive." Owen stepped back down and pointed toward Martin's truck. "Go." Martin did not move at first. Then a siren sounded far off. Faint, but coming closer. Mrs. Alvarez stood by the porch post with her phone in her hand, and her chin lifted. Martin heard it too. His face changed from fury to calculation, and calculation had always been faster in him than courage. He backed down the steps. At the truck, he turned as if he might throw one last word at me. Owen was still holding the ring. Ray was still at my shoulder. Aunt Linda was in the hallway with Eli beside her. Mrs. Alvarez was watching with the full attention of every neighbor who had ever brought soup and stayed long enough to notice pain through a window. Martin got into his truck without another word. He reversed around Owen's car too fast, clipped the edge of Mom's empty trash bin, and drove away with one tail light blinking red until the street swallowed him. Nobody cheered. That would have made it too small. The police car turned onto our block a minute later, slow and official, but by then the dangerous part had already left. Mrs. Alvarez spoke to the officer on the porch. Owen gave his name. Ray gave mine. I stood in the doorway with my baby bracelet closed in my fist, feeling the tiny plastic beads press into my palm like proof I did not need to earn. When the porch finally emptied, Owen stood at the bottom step with the ring in his hand. "I'll take it back," he said. "Not as his property, as evidence of what he chose." I nodded. I did not trust him. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But he had asked before reaching. That counted for something in a day full of men who had not. "What will happen at your father's house?" I asked. Owen looked down at the ring, then toward the street where Martin had vanished. "For once," he said, "he'll have to tell the story with someone else in the room." That was not justice, not all of it, but it was a beginning. He left his number with Ray. Not with me. I was grateful for that. Then he walked to his car, moved it from the driveway, and drove away slowly, carrying the gold Martin had wanted, and the shame Martin had tried to outrun. Inside, the house felt exhausted. The casseroles were cold. The flowers had started to sag. The blue painter's tape Eli had stuck to the cedar chest curled at one corner, like even it was tired of claiming things. Aunt Linda picked up the silver spoons and then put them back down. "Tomorrow," she said. No one argued. Mrs. Alvarez hugged me with one arm because she still had her empty casserole dish in the other. Eli touched the back of my head the way he had when we were kids, and I had fallen off my bike pretending I had not. Ray waited until everyone stepped back. He looked at the baby bracelet in my hand, then at me. "You want me to put that somewhere safe?" he asked. I shook my head. "Not yet." We went back to the sewing room together. The mirror leaned where I had left it. The gray strip hanging open. The pocket empty now. "Claire, look at who stayed." I read the words again. And this time I did cry. Not loud. Not the kind of crying that asks anyone to fix it. Just enough to let my body know the waiting was over. Ray stood behind me in the mirror, not in the center, not blocking anyone, just there. He had always been there. I reached back without looking and took his hand. "Dad," I said. His fingers closed around mine, and his face broke in the reflection. That was when I understood what my mother had really left me. Not a ring, not a secret, not even a warning. She had left me one last room where the truth could stand still long enough for me to see it. Martin had come to claim what was his. My mother had shown me what was mine.